Hi guys, welcome to another Monday night study. We've been going through the second dream of Enoch. We actually started that last week, and we're going to try to do this in three parts because the first part is general. We'll kind of brush over it here. Second part we're doing tonight shows us that it's definitely real prophecy. There's no way it couldn't be. And it gets us up to 1948 AD. Next week, we'll pick up where that left off and see what's supposed to happen according to this set of prophecies from 1948 forward. So we're in the sixth and final part of what we wanted to do, which is that seven shepherds prophecy right here, which is chapters 85 to 90. So let's go ahead and get started. And just to recap, basically what happens is he has a dream of the chronology, which is like from Adam to Noah, Shem to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, down to Moses, down to Saul and David and Solomon. That's kind of where we stopped. And he's showing these different people and different nations as animals, things like that. So this first part, for instance, is about Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. And we saw that last time about it was a white bull that had two bulls. One was black, one was red. White is kind of holy. Let me show you, someone asked the other day about making a chart that I didn't do in this book. This is from our book, Ancient Book of Enoch, that we did several years ago. But here is something I came up with. Just did this morning, actually, taken from chapters 85. So wild beasts or Gentile nations, for instance. And so a bull is someone who's self-sufficient but godly, and we have fallen angels and stuff. When we get down to the animals, lion is Babylon. I thought that was interesting. Lion is Babylon in Daniel's visions. Tiger, Assyria. Wolf, Egyptians. What's interesting to me is this is all from the Ethiopic. When we look at the fragments that are in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's the identical story. The one difference in this section is that the Egyptians are bears instead of wolves. Other than that, it's identical. So I don't know if it really makes much of a difference or not, but it's something to think about if you see a bull or something like that. Dogs are Philistines, boars are Edomites, Amalek, things like that. Eagles are, of course, Rome, things like that. So we have colors and then other things that are symbolic. So working on a chart for that, we'll get this done and put it up. But going back to Enoch, so when you look at this, it's very clear we're talking about Abraham or Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel. And obviously red is sacrifice or murder, bloodshed, that kind of thing. And then black is evil, white is good. So then we have Seth and the creation of the Nephilim. We talked about that last week. And that's in this playlist on YouTube. Enoch's translation, the Nephilim Civil War, the flood. It's interesting that the Nephilim history is all over the scrolls and all over everywhere, and yet we still have people that want to say Sethites and Canaanites from chapter 6 of Genesis. Anyway, we get to the flood, chapter 89, and then we have three bulls, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and they make their nations. And that's when it starts talking about all the cattle and everything. And so there's the flood. And then we have Abraham to Joseph, which is what we talked about last time. And then we get down to Moses. Moses leads them, builds a nation, etc. And then the Exodus occurs. Moses at Mount Sinai, the law, 40 years in the wilderness. The Judges period. And then Saul with the Philistines, the dogs and the foxes, the Philistines, the Amorites and the Moabites, and the wild boars, which is Edom and Amalek. So to me, it's interesting if the scrolls seem to indicate idioms are always the same, symbols are always the same. So if Edom or Esau and Amalek, I guess, are the wild boars, and then the eagle is Rome. If you have some sort of a veiled prophecy in Scripture about eagles and boars, to me, and I found one the other day, and I thought that was interesting because the Edomites and the Romans are connected according to Jasher, ancient history. So it could just be a coincidence, I suppose, but it seems like if we plug in the right symbols, then it makes a difference in some of the prophecies. Something to definitely keep an eye on. Anyway, so Saul, and then we have David, which is obvious, and then Solomon, and then we had the prophets, something about Elijah, and then we go the kings of Israel and Judah form, and then we have Assyria and Babylon, and that's where we ended. So the wolves, the hyenas begin to tear at them, and the lions and the tigers took them into a 70-year captivity. So then they come back from that 70-year captivity is what happens. So during this time period, it's going to talk about, which is from the kings of Israel and Judah, specifically from the time of David forward, there's going to be 70 shepherds. And that's where we want to pick up tonight and just kind of go through some of these things. So let's just read this and we can kind of pull it together. I think it's fascinating. One thing that I mentioned last week that I'll mention again is that we look at these things and people say, well, it was obviously made up in the Middle Ages. Then you find really old manuscripts like this, for instance, it could be made up, but the oldest manuscript is around 200 BC. So it has to be either made up then or translated for something even older. But that's as far back as we can know for sure it went. And the thing is, no matter how you do that, like if you do that for Daniel, they say the same thing about Daniel chapter 11, it's way too accurate. So it's got to be written by some Jew in the 2nd century BC trying to lie to the people and encourage them through fake stories to mount up and attack the Assyrian, the Seleucid Empire, that kind of thing. So cause the Maccabean revolt. And well, that's all fine and good. It's a theory, except chapter 11 doesn't stop with the Maccabees winning a war and then ruling forevermore and ushering in the kingdom or that kind of thing. It actually says that they rule until the ships of Kittim come, which is Rome. And the Romans in chapter 11 destroy the temple, specifically by burning it. So whoever wrote this had to know what the Romans would do. If you're faking a prophecy, you would have to be writing this after 70 AD at least. And then to know the rest of the story, how it happens, is not possible. And you don't have someone who is a false prophet, a liar, create something and have it turn out to be accurate prophecy. So it's just not possible. Should be self-evident. We're going to see the same thing in this section here. So we've got up to David's time, Saul, David, and Solomon, and then the kingdom splits. And we don't care so much about Israel because they apostatize. Judah stays, and so we're going to count the kings of Judah in this. So here's where it starts out. This is still in chapter, I don't think I have that. Maybe I do not have. Okay, I don't have that in here. I think it's chapter 89, if I remember correctly. So starting in verse 59, it says, he called 70 shepherds. Now, the symbolism in here is that the children of Israel are sheep. And the sheep, when they got big enough, separated into 12 folds. So that's obviously the 12 tribes of Israel. So the sheep need a shepherd, someone to guide them. So that would be a king or something, some sort of a ruler. So he calls 70 shepherds and gave the care of the sheep over to them. He said to the shepherds and their companions, let each one of you pasture the sheep to do everything exactly as I command you. So the sheep are supposed to go out to pasture, graze, relax, have a good time, and they're supposed to guard them. If there is something evil, put it to death, but don't abuse the sheep, just protect them, do that kind of stuff. What a king would do. So do exactly as I command you. I will deliver them over to you, duly numbered, and tell you which of them you are to destroy. So if this was really a shepherd and sheep, some of them are diseased and you would destroy them. wolves and bears come in to try to attack and kill the sheep, you would destroy them. Outside of that, you would let everything be, try to feed them, that kind of thing. So you're supposed to do that. He said, verse 6:1 says, when he had given the sheep over to them, he called another. And later on, we figure out this is Michael. It's one of those four angels. So he calls one of those four angels over and says, write down everything that the shepherds do to those sheep, for they will destroy more of them than I have commanded. So the shepherds actually some of them turn out to be evil. Record how many they destroy out of the ones I command them to destroy, and how many out of the ones I command them not to destroy. So we remember Saul was supposed to wipe out the Amalekites and different ones, and he refused at one point. So that would be an example. He might kill the people he's not supposed to kill, or attack a tribe he's not supposed to attack, or he might allow idolaters or evil people to flourish. And either one would be a sin. You're supposed to do exactly what the Lord has told you to do. So he's supposed to write down everything that they do so you can have a tally of this. Record how many they destroy out of those commands. I read that. Record against every individual shepherd all the destruction he effects, so that I may have this as a testimony against them, and know every deed of the shepherds, whether or not they abide by my command, which I have commanded them. Now, obviously, the Lord can know, but in this vision or this dream, there's going to be a written record. So everything's recorded. You're not going to get by with doing anything you're not supposed to do. So this is, and he goes on and says, do not declare this to them or warn them, but only record against each individual all the destruction which the shepherds effect, each in his time, and lay it before me. So there's these 70 shepherds, and then there's going to be a judgment day, in other words. So now we want to look at these 70 shepherds. So this should start at this time and go forward. So this first section, the first 20, is from Rehoboam to Zedekiah. That's the king list of Judah from the time the kingdom split under Solomon, when Solomon died, going to the destruction of the temple with the Babylonians, which we've already covered in general up there. So he says this, I saw till those shepherds pastured for a season, and they began to kill and destroy more than they were bidden. And they delivered those sheep into the hand of the lions. Now again, that's a certain Gentile nation. Lions would be the Babylonians. Tigers would be the Assyrians. So the Assyrians, as you remember, take the 10 tribes. Then the Assyrians got taken over by the Babylonians. Then the Babylonians take the Judah, the remaining tribes. So they get handed over to the lions. The lions and the tigers, which would be the Assyrians and the Babylonians, ate and devoured the greater part of those sheep. And the wild boars, those would be Edomites, so Esau, whoever's there at that point, ate along with them. And they burnt the tower from last week, we remember Solomon's temple. So the Babylonians come in and do this, okay? And they demolished the house, which is the kingdom of Judah, so that they don't exist anymore for 70 years. I mourned a great deal over that tower, because the house of the sheep was demolished, and afterwards I was unable to see if those sheep entered that house. So he was unable to see. It got to the point that there were apparently no Jews left in Judah. They were all taken captivity. So it seems like they're gone completely. So then it goes on and says, it was written by the other in a book how each one of them were destroyed by them. So who destroyed who? out of those 70 shepherds which ones were godly, which ones were not. Each one killed and destroyed many more than he was ordered. So they were evil. And I began to weep for those sheep. I watched how he wrote down every one that was destroyed by those shepherds day by day, and carried up and showed the whole book to the Lord. Everything that they had done, the book was read before the Lord, and he took the book from his hand, and he read it, sealed it, and laid it down. So the angel did what he was told and gave the record to the Lord. So this is over all this time period. Now this is what's really interesting, because you have 70 shepherds, and you have, right here is 20, getting down to the destruction of the temple. And then you have this break, because after Zedekiah, you have Babylon ruling over Israel. So it's a time that the shepherds, the kings, are sent out to pasture. There really is no shepherd over them, because the wild animals are ruling over them. Okay, so we continue with this. It says that there's these 12 hours. And I think this is really important. We know in Revelation it talks about there was silence in heaven for about a half an hour, a space of about a half an hour. And I'm not sure what that means exactly. In this case, an hour is a time period. And it's not a specific time period. It's a time period while a Gentile power is ruling over Israel. 5 minutes, 5 years, 500 years, whatever. We see the same thing in generations. In this series, if you back up a little bit to one of the previous videos, we have the prophecy of the 70 generations, which are supposed to be from Enoch to the Messiah. And when you go to Luke chapter, I think it's chapter 2 with the genealogy, you'll see that it counts back from Jesus all the way back to Enoch. And sure enough, it's recorded that there were 70 generations. You can't use that to put a number on it, like it's going to be exactly 516 years, 12 months, and 3 days. It's a generational count. It's a grandfather to a father, to a son, to a grandson, to a great-grandson. Who knows when they have children, somewhere along the line. So it's just a generational count. So sometimes they're very, very specific, and other times they're just meant for a generational count. So in this case, there's 12 hours, 12 times or periods of time where evil Gentile nations are ruling over Israel. So this is where I think it gets fascinating. So he says, I saw how the shepherds pastured for 12 hours. So another way of saying this is that the shepherds are put out to pasture. So there's these 12 hours. Okay. And it says, and behold, 3 of those sheep turned back and came and entered, turned back and came and entered, and began to build up all that had fallen down of that house. So we're probably talking about Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah, the principal government leaders that came back, reestablished Israel and Jerusalem and the temple. Okay, so it says the wild boars, which would be Edomites, possibly Arabs, tried to hinder them. That's recorded in Nehemiah and Ezra. But they were not able to successfully hinder them. They built up that tower. So, the temple's been rebuilt. So now we've got the second temple. And it was named the High Tower. So this is the second temple. Then they began again to place a table before the tower and put all the bread on it, but the bread was polluted and not pure. So this, I wrote in here, remember everything in brackets is my idea, and most of it's, pretty straightforward. Some of it's kind of confusing. So obviously they made a temple, they started the sacrifices, but it became polluted. So we know it gets polluted by Antiochus Epiphanes sacrificing the pig on the altar, the Maccabean revolt, that kind of thing. Also, they switch calendars. They also get rid of the Zadok priests and put in fake priests or priests that are not supposed to be priests legally according to the law of Moses. So there's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of detailed history for that time period. But anyway, so the second temple was created, the sacrifices began, everything was fine in the beginning, they were godly, but then it became corrupted again. So now it says, all the sheep, as well as the shepherds, were blind to all this. And a great number of the sheep were delivered to the shepherds for destruction. And they trampled the sheep with their feet and devoured them. Now, if you go to Daniel chapter 11, and this is what's really fascinating, is that you're told, well, Daniel in general, you're told what happens. So you have the Babylonian Empire ruling over Israel after Zedekiah, okay? Then they come back and they have kings and stuff, but the kings are subject to the other kings. So the Babylonian Empire was taken over by the Persian Empire, Cyrus. So at that point, Nebuchadnezzar's out, Cyrus is in. But you still have to follow what Cyrus says. You're not totally independent, right? If you do something Cyrus doesn't like, you'll probably be destroyed. So Cyrus rules for a time until Alexander the Great comes in. That's the United Greek Kingdom. We see that in Daniel also. He dies and his kingdom is split into 4 pieces, 2 of which cause Israel a lot of problems. There's the Seleucid Empire to the north, which, and this Seleucid Empire is actually, think of it as Syria, the Syrian Empire. They're ruled by Greeks, but it's this area of Syria, Assyria, Lebanon up there. The other one is this Ptolemaic Empire, and that's the one ruling from Egypt. So it's the Egyptian Empire, like Cleopatra, who's actually mentioned in chapter 11 of Daniel also. So what happens is, if you look very carefully and go through Daniel 11, and I think we've got some charts up on the board that does that on the website, but you'll see that one king comes in, takes over the land as far as Israel, controls it for a while, and then the other king will come against him and take territory. And in the process of happening, you're going to have Israel in the middle, who's owned by Syria, and then is taken over and owned by Egypt, and then taken over and owned by Syria, and then Egypt, and then Syria, and then Egypt, and it keeps going back and forth. And you can identify the kings that did this. So if you look at this, the first Gentile power gap in time was Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian Empire, and then Cyrus, the Persian Empire, Alexander the Great, okay, the Grecian Empire, and then when that breaks up, there's the Egyptian and the Syrian one. So first, we start off talking about Bernice and that stuff in chapter 11, and Ptolemy the first, okay, of that Egyptian empire, the Ptolemaic Empire, takes over and expands and captures Jerusalem. So Israel belongs to Egypt at this point. Then there's a war, and Antiochus II, first never did anything with him, but Antiochus II manages to come down and take over Israel and pushes his territory further south in Israel. But now Israel is Syrian territory. And this keeps going on. Then Ptolemy III does the same thing. Then Seleucus III. Then Ptolemy IV. And Antiochus III. And Ptolemy V. And then finally, Antiochus Epiphanes. We get up to that point. So what's happening here then, if you're going to name empires, these are the people that ruled them, but the empires, 1 to 11, would be Babylonian, Persian, Grecian, basically Egyptian, Syrian, Egyptian, Syrian, Egyptian, Syrian, Egyptian, and Syrian, okay? And then we understand with Antiochus Epiphanes, they kick him out, his kingdom is destroyed, and then they gain independence finally. This is what's called the Maccabean time period. So there's this Maccabean gap, okay? And then, but that leaves one more Gentile power to rule over Israel. And we know what happens is that they're independent, they're recognized as an independent state. When the wars between the Pharisees and the Sadducees got really bad, they both petitioned Rome to step in to restore order. Rome did, and basically took over everything. And so their independence stopped. So when we look at this, we want to look at the Maccabean gap, and then we know the Roman Empire took over again. So this is the 12 hours of Gentile rule over Israel. Okay, so let's remember back here, we have the first 20, Rehoboam to Zedekiah. Okay, and so now we're going to pick up after that. That would be, of course, Judah the Maccabees. The first time they've been actually independent as a sovereign nation since the Babylonian captivity, basically. So at this point, you have Judah Maccabee down to Agrippa II. And so we'll look at this. It says, the Lord of the sheep remained unmoved till the sheep were dispersed over the field and mingled with the beasts. So this is obviously not the Babylonian captivity, but the Roman one, dispersed among the nations, the wild beasts, the Gentile nations. And the shepherds did not save them out of the hands of the beasts. The one who wrote the book carried it up and read it before the Lord and implored him on their account, showing all the things the shepherds did. He took the actual book and laid it down beside him and departed. Now, at this point, when you get through, remember, here's Herod Archelaus. When Herod died, Archelaus took rule. That's when Jesus, with Joseph and Mary, took Jesus back from Egypt, back into Israel. They heard Herod Archelaus was ruling, so they turned aside and went to Nazareth, remember, which fulfilled the prophecy of him being called a Nazarene. Well, Archelaus, an interesting story behind that, basically went nuts and had a group, I think, of some 200 priests executed because he's considering himself a king, a ruler. He can do whatever he wants. Rome didn't like that. You don't just kill 200 anybody for any reason without a big trial. Even if you fake it, it's got to look right. So they can't have loose cannons. So he was deposed, and then Agrippa I was put in, and then finally Agrippa II. And then after that, remember what's going on is Rome is trying to restore order and then get out of there. It's an expense. So put a Pharisee in charge, that didn't work. Put a Sadducee in charge, that didn't work. Pharisee, Sadducee. And then they decided, let's pick somebody who's not a Pharisee or a Sadducee, like a secular guy. And they picked this Idumean, that was Herod. That should fix the problem. He's not pro any religious denomination or faction. No, that was even worse. So they keep trying this, and finally they say, we're done. Israel is going to cease to exist. We're going to take it over as a providence. We're going to kick all the Jews out, and that'll fix the problem. So that's what happens with Agrippa. Remember, up in Agrippa's time, Paul is coming before him and makes his appeal to Caesar and goes to Rome. So this is during the time of the gospel. The gospel is being preached by the apostles by this 34th shepherd. Okay. Okay, so then the next section is the last of the 35. So look at what it says here. I watched in this manner until the 35 shepherds pastured the sheep. They each completed their period, as did the first, one after the other, each shepherd in his own period. Okay, so, but we have to stop at this point and wait and back up. We have 34, not 35. And there's been 11 Gentile empires, not 12. And so then we see at this point the Roman Empire coming in and Israel being dissolved. So it looks like the 12 Gentile powers is cool, but somehow we're missing a leader. Well, what happens is 70 AD comes, the temples are destroyed, Israel is dispersed. and then a series of small wars occur, which don't amount to a whole lot. But then in 132 to 135 AD, a man by the name of Simon Bar Kokhba actually managed to throw off the Romans because they were busy doing something somewhere else, and managed to create a small, very small, independent Jewish state, okay, in that area. And he managed to hold on to it independently for 3 years. Might we say 3 years and 6 months, 3.5 years. Very interesting parallels. Anyway, but the Romans came in and destroyed him. You probably know about the Cave of Horrors in the Dead Sea, in the Qumran area. Some of the Bar Kokhba warriors are there. They were trapped in this cave, and they found their skeletons with some of the kids' skeletons and some of the coins, so they know who it is. And of course, you remember Masada. So all that stuff is going on. So this ends the 35 after that. Now think about this carefully. We're going to go on and read this to make sure we're on the right track. But if this dream starts from Adam and goes through Saul and David and Solomon, then they start counting 70 shepherds. And at the end of 70 shepherds, we should have a kingdom or something. It's one of those type prophecies. So out of that 70, the first 35 are counted. And that gets us from Rehoboam to Bar Kokhba. Well, Israel completely, for real this time, ceases to exist for over 1,800 years, and then comes back in 1945, or 48 rather. So if this is a real prophecy, shepherd number 36 should be in 1948, somebody ruling Israel. And we should start from 36 and go forward to 70. And we should have a kingdom. So we're going to see how all that fits together. That to me is fascinating. Now that could be made up, except again, who's writing this if it's not Enoch or not a translation from way back when? If it is, it's prophecy. If it's something fake, it definitely did not get written about 140 to 150 AD. There's no way you could have the 35 and the 12 Gentile gaps and have it work out like this and with this kind of a pattern. It's just too specific. So let's read how this part happens. So the last of the 35. So this is the Roman dispersion. So it says, after that, I saw in my vision all the birds of heaven coming. The eagles, and of course that's Rome. And remember, we're talking about the powers. So getting back to this, the eagles are Rome. With the Romans, there were kites, vultures, falcons, and ravens. Not sure who those were exactly. And maybe it's not super important. But obviously, it might be important. So we really do need to identify all these. The dogs and the tigers and the lions and all these things. Squirrels. Really makes you wonder who the squirrely ones were. Anyway, so this is what it says. After this, in my vision, I saw all the birds of heaven coming, eagles, Rome, with vultures, kites, and ravens. But the eagles led all the birds. So we're talking about Rome leading the invasion. They began to devour those sheep, to pick out their eyes, to devour their flesh. The sheep cried out because their flesh was being devoured by the birds. As for me, I looked and cried out in my sleep over the shepherd who pastured the sheep. So this is the Bar Kokhba thing. Okay. Now, look at this very carefully. Remember, this is supposed to be Enoch way back when. And I want to share, this is fascinating too. I watched until those sheep were devoured by the dogs, the eagles, and the kites, the Gentile nations under Rome. And they did not leave any flesh, skin, or ligaments, okay, on them. Only their bones stood there. Think about that for a minute. Their bones too fell to the earth, or the land, Israel, and the sheep became very few in number. So think about Ezekiel chapter 37. This is exactly the same thing as what Ezekiel is describing in his vision, the valley of dry bones, Israel being obliterated to the nations. Nothing is left of them. There's a few sheep, a few, Jews, but the nation is gone. And nations don't just come back. So they're gone, never to come back again, But then something happens and they actually do come back. One of the things, I don't think I have that up. We're going to be at the Prophecy Watchers Conference in June of this year. And we're going to be talking about the new book, which has got Dead Sea Scroll prophecies in it. And one of those prophecies, one of those commentaries, they have a lot of specific prophecies, but they also have commentaries on all the major and minor prophets. One of those is Ezekiel. And the commentary on Ezekiel, basically, I'm just going to share this real quick, teaches that there are two times when Israel is destroyed and they are a valley of dry bones. One time they come back believing in Messiah. That would have to be under Cyrus when they returned from Babylon. And the other time they come back without a spirit, without breath in them. And that would have to be 1948. They come back trusting in God, but they have no concept of a Messiah or Trinity or anything like that. So they have lost something, which is fascinating because, number one, that tells us that Ezekiel 37, there's no debate anymore. It's not something back then and or here or both. No, it is specifically 1948. And then there's other pieces in chapter 37 that haven't been fulfilled yet, and some that have. So very, very fascinating to have that corroborated, proven by the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then we go back here and see it here in Enoch also. Again, you could say this is made up. If so, he's a very good writer. But he would have to make this up after Ezekiel and after 135 AD. And that's not when this first appeared. So their bones stood there. So those bones will eventually come back. And that's going to be 1948. So that's the last of the 35. So I'll just show you this here. The next verse says this: I watched until the next 23 shepherds pastured, and when they completed their periods, they had pastured 58 times. That's kind of a very cryptic clue. But basically what we're trying to see here is that there's 70 shepherds. There were 35 from the beginning to the end. So that's Rehoboam to Bar Kokhba. There's an 1800-year gap. Then there are 23 from 1948 to a point when a very evil shepherd arises, which I'm assuming is the Antichrist. So we're talking about that last 7-year period. During that period, there are 12 rulers. Apparently, there's a lot of assassinations going on during the tribulation period. And then there's a kingdom. So again, we can't use this to set exact number of years per rule, but we can look and see approximately how that works out. We're going to look at this next time because it gets really, really complicated. But this time I wanted to share you, and I just thought this was interesting, the whole idea that we have 35 of these guys, and we get from 1 to 20, then we have supposed to be also 12 Gentile gaps, but we only have 11. And then we have a Maccabean gap where we have 21 to 34. Then we have the Roman Empire. And then we have Bar Kokhba. So it's really interesting to see how history corroborates that first part of the prophecy. So to me, this is rock solid. So now next week, we want to start with, do real briefly, this again, and do a study in 1948 forward. So we'll go ahead and stop there for tonight, and I'll check and see if there's questions in the chat room. And let's see. Well, looks like there's a handful. Okay, first question. Let me see if I can do this right here. Oh, where'd it go? First question. Oh, there we go. Virginia asks, could you explain the difference between the Torah and the Oral Torah? Also, which languages do you speak, translate? Thank you. The Torah originally meant the first 5 books of the books that Moses wrote. So the Torah properly means Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Okay, and then later on, though, the Torah can be the law. So it can collectively be the Old Testament. Now, so technically, the Torah or Pentateuch is the first 5 books in the Old Testament. And then you've got the law, the prophets, and the histories, which they took the first letter in Hebrew of each one of those and made Tanakh. So if you hear somebody saying, I read the Tanakh, it means the Old Testament, out of which the Torah is just that first 5 books. But then other people will just say it's Torah, it's just the law. And we're talking about the entire Old Testament. Then also later on in time, you get most Jews are going by the Talmud rather than even looking at the Old Testament. They would say it's all real and everything, but the latest stuff is more important. Kind of like in church history or in Christianity, most of us want to read the Bible and follow what the Bible says. But then there are some denominations that would say, no, that's absolutely real, but you probably would misunderstand it. So we'll set that aside and not read the Bible, but we'll follow what the church fathers tell us it means. And so you've got big denominations that just do follow what the popes or the priests or the patriarchates or whatever teach, the church fathers, rather than the Bible. And so you have the same thing in Judaism. They're going to set aside the Old Testament and follow the Talmud, where the people that do that may refer to the Talmud also as Torah. So it just all depends on, it's used a bunch of different ways. Now, the Oral Torah, technically, is what we would call the Talmud or the writings at that time period. So the idea is, and part of this is true. I mean, like, for instance, in the Torah, Jews are supposed to sacrifice animals and do certain things a certain way. Well, that's fine, but if you were going to try to do that, there's not enough information in Leviticus to tell you exactly how to sacrifice the animal. Maybe it doesn't matter, you just kill it, but you probably don't hit it with a club. I mean, the details on exactly how to do the things that they did, or the looking for the leprosy or the herbs or the food preparation, there's not enough detail to do it properly. And so these things would have just been tradition, handed down, probably accurate, but that would be the oral Torah, the rest of the story. So if you're supposed to sacrifice a cow, the fact that you do it at Jerusalem, facing a certain way, saying a certain prayer, using a certain kind of a knife, whatever it is that you do, that would be all given that way. Now, with that, which is true, oral Torah, the rabbis added a bunch of garbage, or I would consider it garbage, just junk. You should do this and not do this, and there's just no basis for that. So the oral Torah then is looked down upon in a lot of cases. So you got Hebrew roots groups trying to mix these two together and things like that. So in the New Testament, Jesus uses the term tradition of the elders, or it's used that way in like Matthew and those places, and referring to the same thing, the oral Torah. It's the traditions of man that make void the word of God. Like one example Jesus gave is they said that the Torah says you have to take care of your father and your mother. When your father and your mother get old, you take them in, you keep them, you nurse them to health as much as you can, you take care of them. You don't just throw them away. However, there is a Korban law about sacrifices and donations to the temple. But the Torah would simply say, if you only have enough money to either feed your family or donate it to the church, you feed your family. The church can figure out what it's going to do elsewhere. They flipped it around and said, no, no, if you designate a fund to the temple and call it Korban, then the prohibition or the command to take care of your parents is null and void. So you can see what they're doing. It's like, let the family starve as long as I get the money. So that kind of stuff. And Jesus was extremely angry at them for doing this kind of stuff. And they did all sorts of things like that. So oral Torah in general, the specifics of how to do what you're supposed to do, or like how to recreate the temple and the priestly garments and things like that, those are all written in places now and assumably accurate. But then there's stuff added to it that's also supposed to be oral Torah or the traditions of the elders that are not correct. As far as languages, just Hebrew is what I focus on. I took a little bit of Greek in seminary, but I'm not that great at Greek. And I know a lot of you out there are going to say that I'm not that great at English either. I do misspeak a lot these days. But thank you for the questions. Question, in John 4:46, is the nobleman from King Herod Antipas' court? There is a nobleman. Okay. Do you think this could be Manean? It could be. I was started to look that up earlier. You said it was John 4:46. I don't know. Probably not. I mean, it could be. And the reason I say this is because the Manean is mentioned in Acts, and he actually ran the Sanhedrin, had abandoned or left his position because he became a believer, and that's all from the Talmud. And then it mentions that he was the one that was raised in King Herod's court. We have a good amount of history of him being in Essene, being 100% accurate with his prophecies, and then being with Agabus up in the school of the prophets in Antioch. And then in Acts, I think it's Acts 13, it says that the prophets came down from Jerusalem to lay hands on and anoint Paul and Barnabas for service. And it mentions 3 or 4 of the guys that were there. And one of them was Manean or Menachem, who had been raised in King Herod's court. So that's telling us that that's one and the same person, which is fascinating because we talk a lot about herbal medicine on the channel too. And the fact that all the records indicate that the Essenes lived to be about 120. The regular Pharisees lived to be about 80 because they had some medicines, kind of like us now. And the Gentiles usually lived to be about 60, 65, something like that. And so that fits because he would have been a young man in King Herod's court. And now Paul, this would have been in the 50s probably that Paul was doing this. They laid hands on him. Definitely before 67 when he was executed. So 50s and 60s in there somewhere. This would make Manean 90 to 100. But still, that's pretty easy for a group of people that normally live to be 110 to 120. So it's fascinating to think of a 90-year-old guy hopping on a donkey in Antioch, riding down to Jerusalem so that he could, anoint someone. He would definitely be filled with the Spirit. So fascinating guy. And so this is a nobleman. And I'm thinking nobleman might be more along the lines of a noble person as far as the Romans are concerned, rather than a wacky priest type thing. Although the Romans had no problem with Essenes. Essenes basically recognized they were there by prophecy, and they all carried weapons to protect themselves out on the road with bandits and stuff, but they didn't give the Romans any problem. The problems for the Romans were the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So he could have definitely had a son. I don't know. But yeah, it's not sure about that. That's a good point. I don't know that we have anything about that particular verse. We could look that up in the church fathers and see if they say anything about it. That would be a good idea. Super sticker, $50. Thank you very much for the donation. Thank you all for donating through Give, Send, Go and PayPal, and like we have the donate button up here at the top, and support us through these things through the super chats and buying the books and giving them to your pastors and those things. David became an archangel. Well, great. Welcome aboard, and thank you very much for your support. I just heard you mention that that name, for the first time in an interview today, and Essene. Yeah, it's a type of Jew. Basically, if you were just normal Jewish, up until the time of when Ezra and Nehemiah, came back, all that time, Jews were Jews. They may speculate on prophecy or something, but they didn't segregate. It was considered sinful to be a denomination, to break up the brotherhood. And then the Pharisees and the Sadducees arose, and they said that they were cults. They were the ones that taught there was no Messiah, and they just messed everything up. The Essenes, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, were very clear. The writers of the Dead Sea Scrolls taught that the Messiah would be God incarnate. He would come to die for our sins. That would reconcile us to God. The event would occur basically in 32 AD, one Shemitah after the end of the 9th Jubilee. Many, many things, starting the Age of Grace. They're basically Christian in doctrine. And they said that that's always been taught that way. It's the cults that rose up and the cults that took over the government that changed everything. It's that apostasy that hit. And I think that's really important for us to think about that, because in 2 Thessalonians, right before the Antichrist comes on, there is an apostasy. And it's not just people being apostate. It is the apostasy. So if you're going to compare that, it's basically like the way the Pharisees and Sadducees were back then, and that was pretty bad. But we can at least study that and get a good idea of what things might be. Like if you study the life of Antiochus Epiphanes and know that the Antichrist will probably mirror that, then you could probably get a good handle on some extra biblical ideas or points on how he's going to do something. So very, very important. Yeah, I'm not sure which one you were talking about, but Manean in Acts 13 is an Essene, because it was very clearly taught in multiple places. He's not the only one, but it's nice when you finally get somebody. Paul was a Benjamite raised as a Pharisee, and then he became a Christian, and so you've got Sadducees and other groups. Do you see any specific prophecy fulfilled with the death of the Iranian president? Not a specific prophecy, but I think it's interesting because as far as Iran is concerned, Iran is one country that used to be Elam and Persia, like Cyrus. So prophecies dealing with Elam and or Persia could be end time prophecies, and some of those are, I think most of us believe, are still yet future, are Jeremiah 49. Talk to an Iranian Christian about Jeremiah 49. They're very, very hopeful in that, because if that is our time period, then very quickly it will become a Christian nation. So anyway, but there's a lot of things going on, a big destruction that comes, a mass dispersion, and some of that may have already happened. But when you also couple it with Enoch and a few other Dead Sea Scrolls, there's some more details, about those things that happen. So for instance, there's a time when Iran attacks Israel, and it's never happened before a couple of weeks ago. And that was a massive, massive attack. I think it was unprecedented. I'd heard that there's been no country send that many missiles and drones to another country. If they weren't able to stop it, you would have had millions of innocent people killed, which is insane. But anyway, the fact that it was stopped like in a day, it has to be the Lord that has to be behind that. And then it's over. And that's not the way that it ends, according to prophecy, which means this is just the beginning. So there may be a peace for a while or other things, and I'm not sure how they actually go together, but we'll need to take those together. And I think we have some videos on that too. Now that we have the Dead Sea Scroll prophecies pretty much in a nutshell, early church father commentaries on them, and the Bible, and then modern history up until yesterday, everything, written, we should be able to figure out a lot more of these prophecies. So the death of the Iranian president, most of Iran is celebrating. I was just watching something on Amir's channel. A guy had posted that the first time he'd went to Iran, it was 1985, and this guy was president. And I don't know if that's true or not. I didn't look at it, but this is what the report had said. First thing that he remembers vividly back then when he first went to Iran is a group of 3 people that were hung publicly. Now, that's not a big deal, but when you hang someone, you put them in a noose and you drop them so that the shock, the way they drop, breaks the neck. It's very humane. This guy ordered that they not be dropped, that they be hoisted up. So that's a slow strangulation, which is extremely inhumane. And he did stuff like that apparently. I don't know. But this guy's report was like, you can understand why people are happy, and think of all the innocent women that have been killed because they simply don't wear a covering on their head. Things like that. So they're happy about it. I think it's interesting because there's several prophecies about that kind of thing. And then also today there was a report that the king of Saudi Arabia was ill. He's 88. And the crown prince is moving forward to have normal relations with Israel. They're 2 countries. And I think it's interesting because when we get to Ezekiel 38, we have Saudi Arabia, England, United States, and other groups on Israel's side. They don't necessarily move to intervene, but they are not with the Russian coalition that attacks Israel. So it's interesting to see how things are beginning to come in line with that. So I don't think that's a direct thing. It is something that's going to make a change. Now that we know for sure the party was, the party died, basically. Everybody in the helicopter, I think, died. And some people are trying to say it was an assassination attempt. And other people, are basically saying, no, it's just a plane crash or helicopter crash. Either way, it's going to make changes. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. Okay, became an angel. Thank you very much for joining us and supporting the channel. Enoch 88:18. May white bulls be Melchizedek and the sheep Levitical, as the first sheep is Jacob. Isaac taught Levi the priesthood, skipping over Jacob. If so, what is the change from sheep to shepherds? Yeah, that's a good question. And again, just by looking at it and trying to pull back the history, it seems like the sheep, it's more like like over here in the United States, we talk about the Wild West, or frontier justice. If we're not part of a society that has police on every corner, somebody does something wrong, one of us take the guy out, please, just restore law and order. Anybody, just somebody do it. And so it seems like the bulls were that way. The white bulls were righteous. If somebody was doing something wrong, they would be eliminated. when you get to the sheep part, it's almost like a country is formed with laws and police and military and this and that. And so the idea is you don't take the law into your own hands. No vigilantism. So somebody, you report it, and hopefully whoever is in power will fix it. That kind of a thing. So, and it talks about the sheep appear, and then the sheep finally multiply and get big enough that they have 12 stalls. Well, that's obviously the 12 sons of Jacob that become the 12 tribes. So I don't think it's necessarily a priest, Melchizedekian, Levitical type switch, but specifically the switch between, I mean, it could be, we'll have to think about it, but it seems like it's the switch between frontier type justice with civilization, so to speak, for lack of a better term. Civilization sometimes cannot be the greatest also. Is there any documentation by the church fathers on what year the Apostle John wrote the book of Revelation? Yeah, there are several. He wrote it while he was exiled, and that's supposed to be approximately 95 or 96 AD. And then they said that immediately thereafter that Caesar died, and he persecuted the Christians, but also several other groups. The guy was like a nutcase. So when he died, and I don't know if it was technically an assassination or what, but he died, the new guy takes over, and he undoes all the proclamations that the previous Caesar did. So they free the Christians and a lot of the political groups. It was like a big thing back then. And so at that point, John is released from Patmos, goes back to Ephesus, and starts planting churches again. He lives all the way up into the time of the Emperor Trajan. Now, Trajan ruled from, I think it's 98 or 99 to 117. So worst case scenario, John dies at 99 AD. Best case scenario, or however you want to say it, at maximum would be 117. So somewhere in that time period. So he lived to be a long time. So he probably would have been in Essene as far as being able to live that long, continue to do the work of a missionary. So yeah, there were a few people. I think there's one church father that said something along the lines of it being written in the 60s or something, I think. Preterists will like point that one out. Probably, if anybody would get the dates wrong, it probably would be Clement of Alexandria. He seemed to get a lot of things wrong in that way. That's in Alexandria, Egypt. That's the place that was a stronghold of Gnostics too. So there's a lot of confusion as to who did what, why, and that kind of stuff. There was this really strange thing that happened with Phineas, which was the guy that ran the school there before Clement of Alexandria got there. So lots of intrigue in that part of history. But so, yeah, so there's one or two people maybe that say a different date, but all the rest of them would give 95 to 96 AD as the date for the book of Revelation being written. Luke 18:8, Jesus wonders if he will even find faith when he returns. Do you think this is the rapture or the second coming, or do you think it's due to the apostasy? It's a scary verse. It is definitely a scary verse. I think it's definitely related to the apostasy that he's talking about. And that's a good question. Probably, and this is just my guess, but probably I would think it would be the fact that there's not many of us now compared to, even 50 or 100 years ago. But then the rapture occurs, and for an instant, there's no Christians, no believers. But then there's a lot of believers people that become believers because they see the rapture, for one thing. That's what the book of Enoch says about it engendering repentance, the rapture part, the catching away. Those may or may not be martyred. If the majority are martyred, some of them have to make it through to repopulate the millennial reign. But when he returns, if the vast majority of people are with the Antichrist, then yeah, it's I'm not sure because it's confusing. Because all the wars that the Antichrist fights, somebody doesn't like him if he's constantly fighting wars. Now that's in the first half, but still, it's an interesting thing to kind of see what happens. It is a very scary verse. I definitely want us to be with the Lord at that point, raptured, not here. How can you get the list of animal nations? Oh, yeah, this one. I just started putting that together today, so I'll make a PDF of it and put it on the website. BibleFacts.org is where I put most of those things. But as you can see, I don't have most of these. I don't know if there would be a way to figure that out or not. I could probably just post it as is. And again, it may not matter, but it might. So it's something interesting to see. Diana Smith became member angel. Okay, thank you again. Thank you for supporting us and being in the chat room. Another angel. Thank you very much. And then super chat $10. Thank you very much for the donation. Listen to an old Dr. Ken. Listen to an old Paul Smith interview. That's Pastor Chuck Smith's brother. Paul mentioned your great books. Yeah, he was a fan. I'd given him several. He got dementia, and he's passed away now. But anyway, I get involved with the chat and always re-listen to this live stream. Oh, great! Thank you for letting me know that. It's I miss Paul. I got to talk with him several times before he died. He was a good friend, and anyway. So we'll get to see each other all in heaven again. I'm sure right now he and Chuck are having a blast. But thank you very much. Was Bar Kokhba the one that Yoshi was trying to point to as Messiah? Yes, yeah. He was the one, and a lot of the rabbis at that point was pointing to him, the son of the star. And then finally, when it all died like it was, that doesn't fit with anything, any of the theories. So they all realized that he wasn't the Messiah. But at that point, that's what caused one of the splits. I mean, Christians and Jews are brothers, and we're fighting together, against Romans. And then one side of the family basically says, "Oh, Messiah's here. It's this guy over here." No, Messiah's Jesus. That's not him. And so if you're going to keep saying we serve this Messiah, then I can't be with you. So sorry, that would be a sin. Nothing against you. I just cannot do that. It is forbidden. So that causes a split. So much like a lot of times if somebody comes to church drunk, we tell them, go somewhere else. And if you want to talk, we'll come talk with you. We'll lead you to the Lord, but you can't be here influencing our kids because that is sinful. Not trying to judge you. I'm just saying the book says, and this is what we do here. So that kind of stuff happened. But a lot of them thought Bar Kokhba was the Messiah for a while. I met a female rabbi, and she said she followed the second Torah, which confused me. A week later, I thought she meant oral Torah. Do you concur? She might be. Sometimes Deuteronomy is referred to as the second law. And so if you're using Torah as law, she might have been referring to that. But it should be the same. I mean, if you're Jewish and you were following Deuteronomy, you should also be following Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and the Old Testament in general. So in her case, she might be referring to the oral Torah. The funny thing about it here is because normally female rabbis, it's forbidden in the Old Testament, like a female pastor is forbidden in Timothy and Titus and a few places in the New Testament. And I know there's a lot of people that say, well, that's very sexist. That's very whatever. I didn't write it. Sorry. It's just what the book says. And so again, it's that thing. It's like, I choose to follow Scripture. So if you choose to sin, to not follow Scripture, You can do that. I'm not going to try to kill you. You can do whatever you want to do over there. We gather together over here because we want to follow the book. So, but it's interesting along those lines. Uh, I was talking to Aaron Lipkin, and we were talking about this kind of stuff. And I was asking him about yarmulkes and tzitzit, because I met a lady who was wearing it, and I said, "Well, I thought that would be disrespectful or whatever." And he said, "Oh, it is. It's considered men's clothing, so it's a prohibition against a woman wearing men's clothing." And that got us talking about rabbis and the fact that there's female rabbis. And he said, "No. The female rabbis and the pro-abortion stance and all the weird stuff is from the Democratic rabbis. Okay, the that are connected with the United States Democratic Party. They're usually in two denominations. They are the conservative and the reformed. I think that's right. Conservative and reformed denominations." And he was saying Orthodox Jews in the United States and the nation of Israel would not consider them Jewish. We would consider them a cult, apostate, because the law is very, very clear. You can't, it'd be like me saying I'm a Christian, but I'm the kind of Christian that worships Lucifer. Well, no, that's not a Christian, that's a Satanist. Well, in my mind, it's a certain kind. Well, your mind doesn't matter. It's what the book says. So I thought that was interesting too. So you'll meet people like that. You'll meet people that are supposedly Jewish or Christian or even Muslim or whatever that follow their holy book, and then others that say, no, we interpret it vastly different. There's cults inside of Christianity too, so there's all sorts of things. So she may have been referring to, if it's conservative or Reform Judaism, I'm not sure what they do exactly. My understanding is that they kind of pick and choose. So if anything, it's probably referring to the oral, the Talmud, basically. But we'd have to ask her to find out for sure. Always something new, isn't it? Okay, Chris asked, the idea that Enoch wasn't written by Enoch is silly. Why do most scholars ignore the fact that, like Daniel, Enoch recorded the entirety of world history in advance, but in much more detail? Well, I think it's two things. A lot of Christianity doesn't want to look at prophecy, because if you look at prophecy and things are literal, then probably the sin lists are literal too. If it's symbolic, then it's just some sort of wacky code that was back then, and now we're free to do whatever we want. If it's all real and very specific and very literal, then you're going to have to mind your P's and Q's. You're going to have to do what you're told, and they don't like that. And then the whole idea of, a lot of people they want to seem like they're scholars, but have everybody like them. And the only way you can kind of do that is say, I have all these things memorized. Do I believe them? No, they're just pieces of paper. But I can tell you what they say, and I can read that ancient language. And so it's just kind of one of those things. Like a lot of churches try to cater to the populace rather than following what God's saying. Again, we should never be mean to anybody. But if the Bible said, when you come to church, you do this, and we all get together for church, why don't we do that the way that it's commanded? And somebody wants to change the rituals and do something else, then go over there and do whatever you do. So very, very important. Yeah, and I think another thing that, though, somewhat legitimately, is, like, for instance, this is Enoch we're talking about. This is first Enoch. The church fathers said it was legitimate. But then there's second Enoch and third Enoch and secrets of Enoch and all this other stuff. And the church fathers will tell us those were written in our time period. There's a cult down the street that wrote this, and we know who did it and why. And so that kind of history helps a lot. This one, whether it's real or not, goes so far back in antiquity, nobody can really prove one way or the other. It's like Daniel. Daniel goes, they say it's a Maccabean period, not possible. But it goes back to the time of Daniel. The Can we prove that as far as manuscripts? No, we only have the oldest one we have. But yeah, I think it's interesting too. But there's a lot of cultic stuff out there. I've had people call me up and say, well, what do you think about the Didache? What do you think about this or that? It's like, oh man, that is a fantastic book. Don't add it to scripture, but it's a fantastic book. So anyway, it's interesting. That's what I'm trying to do gently. And I get the same kind of pushback with the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're a little different because obviously no Christian cult put them together. They predate Christianity. So they're actually real manuscripts, untampered with. Some denomination, be they right or wrong, wrote this, that kind of thing. So it's just really interesting to kind of see that we do need to be careful. Like in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have the Testament of Abraham. In the Mormon collection of books, which we would consider all those fake forgeries, there is a Book of Abraham. And when you look at the two, they're totally different books, but similar names. So some things are made up in the Middle Ages and all, and other things probably are not. But that's the main thing. That's what prophecy is for. It's to test. If somebody gives a prophecy and it doesn't come to pass, it's just a crazy person, right? If it comes to pass, there's no way that a person can be accurately predicting the future events. So unless you'd have to look at it really careful. If they're a charlatan and they got some sort of pull with the government, and I mean, there's things you can do to make yourself look really weird. But there's other ways to look at it and note to disprove something like that. So yeah, I think these are important, especially when you look at these and they all point back to Scripture. My favorite quote, I was telling my previous pastor that's went on to be with the Lord, how in the Testament of Benjamin, it talks about this Benjamite that will create a second canon. There will be a second canon that will have the writings of the Messiah and how the order gets started, and this collection of writings by a Benjamite, which explains everything. And he looked at me funny, and I said, you realize what it's saying? The Dead Sea Scrolls are saying, if you have a question, go to the epistles of Paul. All the answers are in the epistles of Paul. Go read your Bible. And he got thoroughly thrilled with that. He's thinking like, is Ken going off on, left field here? But it says what it says. And to have it say something like that, that's a prediction that there's a new covenant, a new set of books in the new covenant. And there's going to be this Benjamite that writes a series of epistles. Read those things and memorize them. They have all the answers. That's just amazing. Of course, they probably wouldn't believe that either. I wouldn't think. So, okay. Next question is, how long did it take to build the temples, Solomon's or Herod, to be built? A generation. Solomon's, back in 1 Kings, I think it's chapter 6, talks about it was 7 years in the making, from the foundation to the dedication. So he had a lot of people working on it, and 7 years for the first one. Something like that probably could have happened, but Herod kept adding to it. And there are reports that they would add a little here and a little here, another wall, another chamber, for decades. So yeah, probably more than one generation, I would think, or one jubilee. Listen to your Israel update today. Question: when Obadiah 1:19 says Benjamin shall possess Gilead, could this be a prophecy about Benjamin Netanyahu? I suppose it could. I was looking at it, the tribe of Benjamin. But I suppose, yeah, it's just Benjamin. But Gilead is the top corner of Jordan. So when the other prophecies of Obadiah and Zephaniah come to pass about the taking of southern Lebanon and the new border being Seraphon, Lebanon, so that whole, it's amazing in Scripture itself, that whole thing's given. But if in the process of doing that, you would assume that it's just this part of Lebanon tacked onto Israel. Now, this other part over here is Gilead. If there's some reason to do that, oh, actually, I take that back. That part right here would be Golan Heights, and right under that would be Gilead. But still, if there's some reason to take it, or if they gave it to them, or whatever, it will happen eventually, according to that prophecy. But that would be interesting if Benjamin Netanyahu did it for whatever reason. We'll have to watch. It does happen, so we just have to wait and see how it happens. But yeah, the tribe of Benjamin or the shepherd Benjamin, so that would be pretty interesting. Remember, there's other prophecies about the wars that are fought in the Golan Heights, so I have to make sure to watch for those also. Good question. Okay, last question here is, been a member for 14 months, level angel. Thank you very much for supporting us. Do you foresee any major prophecies for 5785, 2025, 2030, 1,000-year interval from the Messiah to 1030, 2030, etc.? 3,000 years is 3 days. Yeah, see, the Hosea passage talks about on the third day I'll raise them up. We need to do some more studies on that, but it is interesting. I don't know of anything specific, like I'm guessing the temple will be built, the rapture will happen, or anything specific like that. But it is really interesting to see those kind of patterns. And ages are 2,000 years apiece. On their calendar, it's 75 AD to 2075 AD. But obviously, the church age began when the same year that Jesus died and resurrected. So 30 or 32 or, whichever one it was in that era forward would bring us to 30 or 2030 or 2032 AD. As far as the church age goes, or the church itself at the 2,000-year period, I would assume something would happen. It may not be a rapture or anything. Maybe the apostasy hits in full force, or who knows. But it sure seems like something would happen. Could be a rapture too. I'm hoping the rapture is before then, but anyway. In the way they do the calendar system, they say the changes of the Jubilee periods, prophecies happen, especially the changes of the ages. So the last Jubilee, or the last generation of the age of grace on their calendar, be it right or wrong, is from March of 2026 to March of 2075. It's a 50-year period. And so I actually expected not a whole lot to happen last year, this year, and next year, until we get past the Jubilee year. But I was wrong. We had the Hamas war. We're having the Golan Heights. Iran attacked for the first time, even though it turned out to be not much. The fact that they attacked Israel, period, the fact that it even happened, is not a direct prophecy, but it pertains to one. So we are really seeing things develop, I think. So yeah, those are things to really look forward to. If you haven't looked at one of our sites is a DSS calendar. .org, and what we've done is we've compared them. So the Pharisee date is ER 13, 5784, and the Dead Sea Scroll date is Savan 3, 5949. And we've done videos on why the years are different and why the dates are different. Gregorian dates, May 21st, 2024, weekday and time. And we have the calendar put together. This is the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. So like today is, well, we just saw it. It was Savan 3. So let me get up here. So that is Savan 3. So it's Tuesday. It's in Israel. It's already tomorrow. This is Monday, May 20th. So that's here. So this is the way their calendar runs. So we can look at how they would interpret prophecy, and how, if there's a date, for instance, compared so many days from something, we can look at this. So I don't have anything specific. I'm not going to say that a certain event would happen. There's a bunch of events that have to happen, and I would assume that date would be connected to some of them. I mean, it almost has to be somehow. So it's something to definitely look at. And since we've kind of already started, that's pretty interesting to see what might happen this year and next year. Thank you, Dr. Ken. Gilead, foreshadow served in the temple, tribulation saves prophecy giving it. All along the same line, could Gilead be a reference to Gibeonites, which might be tribulation saints? I would assume it's more land, but again, those are things to definitely think about, because so many times we're told Gilead or Benjamin does something. And our first assumption, my first assumption, is tribe of Benjamin. Your first assumption would be Benjamin Netanyahu. And I can definitely see probably not both, but one of them, or maybe even something different. But either way, it's some Benjamin doing something and some Gilead doing something. So it's definitely something to look at. So good question. Okay, we'll go ahead and stop there for tonight. Next week, we'll come back and we will pick up and try to do the last part of that shepherd's prophecy. So I'll go ahead and say good night. Be safe, guys, and we will see you next week.